What if I told you I have found the thickest, juiciest ink you can possibly get that is reverse filtered 19 times and aged after formulation? Well, I did. And today we're going to test out that mystery ink by doing some tags with it in a mop and by comparing it to some other inks on the market that are prominent, such as Grog Buff Proof ink, as well as the Inkredible ink by On the Run. That mystery black ink you just saw is rare and pretty valuable nowadays, partially because it is so nice, thick, juicy, but it's also a little more valuable just because it's so hard to get nowadays. I did say graffiti artists loved this ink, past tense, and that is because according to all the research I have done, this ink is just not being made anymore. Now I hear you saying, Sciz, what is this ink? Just tell us. And okay, I'll stop being dramatic, I'm sorry. But I know a lot of you will know what this ink is just from me telling you that the label right on it says harmful or fatal if swallowed. You might also know by me telling you that it comes with a dauber as well as the ink itself in a glass bottle, that this ink is Witch's Brew ink. But that wasn't the reason that I was calling it a mystery ink. There are some mysterious aspects to this ink, or rather what happened to it, that I want to discuss with you guys. So while we fill up a mop with this good old Witch's Brew ink and start to throw some tags up, I'll fill you in on sort of the mystery details about Witch's Brew. But let's head over to the testing area right now, get that going, start to compare it to these other two inks here, as well as test it out in a full buff test. We're doing the whole 9 yards today, guys. Let's get to it. So while we get this mop filled up with this delicious Witch's Brew ink, please don't actually eat this, guys. That's a metaphor. And start tagging out subscribers' names and patrons' names from Patreon. Thank you for the support to my newest patron, Tim, by the way. I'll make sure to tell you how it actually feels using this ink in a mop. Is this one of those inks you can really use at a fast pace? What's it like? Because they all feel different, and that is one of the main purposes of what we're doing here. So I'll make sure to tell you that, as well as in my experience, how this Witch's Brew ink actually holds up over time, stands up to weather, that kind of thing. And after that, we will test head to head the thickness of the Inkredible ink, Buff Proof ink, and of course the Witch's Brew ink. We'll do a thickness test specifically. And just in case you thought we weren't going to test the permanence, of course we are going to see how permanent this Witch's Brew ink is on a unfinished and a finished surface. That's where we're going to do our buff test on each and see how it stands up to that. So if you do appreciate the level of thoroughness we are gonna try and test this Witch's Brew ink out with, feel free to subscribe and check out some more videos on the channel. That helps give YouTube the idea that, hey, maybe we should put a few more of my videos on your homepage that you might be interested in. And there is always more coming on the channel. So let's get right to it. Okay guys, so just to start this off, I want to emphasize a couple things about the Witch's Brew ink here. First of all, this is a black ink to end all black inks in my opinion. The opacity is what I mean. The opacity is just killer. You get this beautiful, beautiful, dark, just true black. It's a true black. That's the best way I can describe it. It doesn't have any tinge of brown in it, no like reddy tinge or a bluish tinge. It's just a true black. It's just incredible. I can honestly say I haven't seen any other black inks that function this closely to a true black, and that's really impressive. That's hard to do, I think, in formulation. Secondly, the thickness. This is what I've been saying all along, and I just could not get drips with this. You probably saw I was squeezing this mop in half. Nice big nib, very flowy, can't get drips. At least you almost can't get any. This is an ink so thick that it is almost thicker than a lot of paints I've used. If I were to compare this to a paint, I would say this is actually a thicker ink than the Grog Full Metal Paint. And Grog Full Metal Paint is on the higher end of thick paints, guys. So that's just how it is. For a few of the tags, I let up on the squeezing. Got some nice sort of wispiness. I really enjoy those kind of tags. I know some people are just like, that's streaky, and that's all they see in it. I think it's sort of beautiful, but you know, it's personal taste. The unfinished surface, I really enjoyed on the consistency of the formula between the unfinished and the finished surface. Not much streaking in either case, and that's what's really impressive. Usually when you get to these finished surfaces, the streaking starts to come out a little bit, especially with inks. Not the case with this Witch's Brew ink. Okay, so just quickly before we start comparing this Witch's Brew ink to the Grog BPI and the Inkredible ink by OTR, I just want to let you know what I found about Witch's Brew ink. The big mystery here is what the hell happened to Witch's Brew ink? If any of you know, please leave a comment down below. Let everyone know. I've tried to look into this on several different occasions with very limited success, let me tell you. The website on the side of the bottle takes you to the singular home screen with no options but to click. When you do click, it takes you to a page with nothing but the label, a 2008 copyright, and a link to the contact information. I've tried to submit through their contact form several times, haven't ever got any replies. Their about section outlines the pretty serious process that this ink goes through during formulation or manufacturing. I believe there are still a few places online that may still have some of this Witch's Brew ink, but Oink Art Ltd, BombingScience.com, GraffitiShop.net all stopped selling this Witch's Brew a long time ago. There's nothing special on social media about this either. That being said, any old reviews that I can find of this ink all emphasize the same thing. This stuff lasts, and that's been my experience with it as well. But I had one last resource I wanted to try to figure out some stuff about this ink, and what it was is Fred at Bombing Science. I asked Fred, what's up with Witch's Brew ink? And if he gets back to me before the end of this video, I'll sit down with you guys and tell you exactly what his response was, because they were a contact at Bombing Science for a long time, and we're stocking Witch's Brew ink. So he's got to know something, right? Okay, so just before we get to our buff test, I want to prove to you just how thick and juicy Witch's Brew ink actually is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down a line and a dot with each of these inks. I'll tell you which is which, just so it's clear, but that'll show you with squeezing the exact same amount on each of these, which of these inks is thickest and juiciest. So let's start with the front runner here, the Witch's Brew. Okay, so first up with the Witch's Brew ink here, I know this is not an exactly scientific comparison. We're not using the exact same nibs in the exact same mop bodies to squeeze equally or whatever, but one thing you can't argue is that you saw me try and squeeze as hard as I possibly can on that Witch's Brew, and these drips are pathetic. They're the nice, beautiful three-dimensional drips you get with thicker paints, not inks. So this to me is crazy. And for those of you who weren't seeing it as crazy, hopefully seeing the Inkredible ink right beside it and then subsequently the buff proof ink just pour down this surface will show you that, yeah, this is pretty incredibly thick compared to some of the standard inks on the market, especially the buff proof ink. I've always thought that that's a bit of a thicker ink, but you sure as hell can't tell just from that. The mops that I was using for the Inkredible ink is the Molotov Dripstick 860DS. If you're interested in a review of that, check the cards in the corner or the description below. I have a full review and surface tagging test of that, as well as the Superflow mops from OTR. They'll be there for you to check out as well. But guys, we are going to get to the buff test right now. I have two different standard buffing materials here, basically, that we'll first test out on the smooth finished surface, just to see how it stands up with low expectations. And then we'll really try and buff this ZK tag. Shout out to the ZK crew. and we'll see on a normal, not polished finished surface if this stuff can stand up to it. And while I start that, I will tell you that Fred did reach out to me with a response on Witch's Brew ink, so I will tell you that after our buff test. So we're gonna start off just by laying a buff down on this Juggla Joe tag. We're trying it with two different kinds here. I'm not gonna buff the whole tag just because, you know, usually you let these sit for a little while. I tend to find with these specific buffing materials, that's not necessary. So your standard sort of graffiti remover there has absolutely no problem. In terms of the other thing, which is like an all-purpose remover, I should be wearing gloves for this, guys, by the way. It's not as clear cut, but either way, there's no ghosting there. This tag is coming off on a finished surface. So let's get to the porous surface now. So the ZK tag, the K is gonna get the graffiti remover here, and the Z is going to get our all-purpose remover. No need for this to settle in, but so because this is so dirty, we can't really tell if there's a ghost here yet. So let's just get another layer down and clear this up. Oh boy. Okay. So there is definitely a ghost here. Using this all-purpose remover, I'm just going to remove the rest with the all-purpose. Okay, so I guess sort of predictably, the actual graffiti remover we used pretty much took this off. Obviously, if I kept scrubbing here, you can get the general color out of there too. There's no ghosting whatsoever. There's a huge ghost here when a general remover is used. So although I don't think this ink is the most permanent thing out there, it's tough. It is a tough ink. And when the formula itself is so beautiful, personally, I can forgive it a little bit for not being entirely buff proof. But I did say I got a response from Fred, so let's sit down. I'll tell you what he said and I'll look at it with you guys, and hopefully that'll give us a bit of an idea of what that means for Witch's Brew ink ultimately. Okay, so this is what Fred said. I sent the email saying, I'm doing a video on Witch's Brew ink, and I was wondering if you guys had any information on what happened to the company or if they're still active at all. He said, hey, I don't know what is happening with Witch's Brew. They haven't answered my emails in about 4 years. So essentially what seems to have happened is they built up a good relationship with Bombing Science, good enough that they would carry their product regularly, and then essentially stopped talking to them for the past 4 years. Now, that's a bit of a slap in the face, not gonna lie. And it also makes me pretty pessimistic about the likelihood of Witch's Brew ink ever really being revitalized or being manufactured again. What that does tell me though, just to conclude, is that if you do still have some of this Witch's Brew ink, or if you find any place that stocks it, that has some leftover stock, you're very lucky and you should scoop it up. That being said, this ink is made to use. If you guys haven't used this in a mop, I think it's a very, very good choice to use in a mop, especially if you're like me and you're not a huge fan of inks in general. You go for the paints more often. Try this out. I promise you'll probably like it. Now, I'm sorry that I can't link you to this product or anything, but this channel is about taking a look at all things graffiti, and that's what we continue to do here. Speaking of which, if you want to know more about either the Inkredible ink or the buff proof ink, both those videos are on screen for you to check out right now. They got some interesting results in their buff tests, which were very surprising. So I hope to see you in either of those videos soon. Until then, peace.